I don't know what Keir Starmer should do. I'm kind of minded that being nice isn't necessarily going to spare us from Trump's tariffs. So maybe we have to be a little less compliant. In a moment, I'm going to talk to Professor Michael Jacobs, Professor of Political Economy at the University of Sheffield. But first to the Chair of Republicans Overseas, Greg Swenson. Morning to you, Greg. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Matthew.
Are you looking forward to Liberation Wednesday?
Yeah. I think some of the comments from the listeners were good. I think Matt specifically, the other Matt, had some good comments. You know, that imports and exports are not a meaningful part of the U.S. economy. One of the comments about tariffs are going to crash the U.S. economy is laughable. Okay, so even with tariffs imposed on exporters or importers, you're going to see at most 250 billion of goods and services affected. The tax cuts and deregulation will amount to 5 trillion in relief on businesses and consumers. So, they're just everything that we're doing with tariffs is, it's being done for a number of reasons. But what's clear is that it's similar to the tariffs in the first term. They're insignificant compared to tax reform and deregulation, which will typically lifts the economy and increases wages, which ultimately results in tax revenues as well. So no, it's.
I mean, you say that. I mean, Donald Trump spent most of the campaign trail talking about inflation.
Yeah.
Since he's come into power, I mean, we haven't got the latest figures, but inflation was going up at the time he went into the White House.
Yes, that's true.
Making things more expensive, one would argue, is not going to help ease inflation. But I noticed Donald Trump doesn't talk about inflation anymore. He was going to solve it on day one. He hasn't. Now he talks about cutting the cost of government, which was rarely mentioned on the campaign trail.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And that's something that we conservatives wish that he had talked about more. And so when he came in, guns a-blazing, we were all very pleased. And, Elon Musk is doing a great job. True, he is unelected. So is the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Energy. I mean, the only person that's elected.
They're accountable to Congress. Elon Musk isn't accountable to anyone. So
it's not true, Matthew. Not true. He's accountable to the executive branch, like the Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury. None of those guys.
That's Donald Trump. So he's accountable to his mate Donald Trump, who's going to buy his cars. That's a nice and cozy arrangement. What if you're an American citizen? If you're an American citizen and you don't like the way this unelected coup is being conducted, you have no democratic recourse at all.
But Matthew,
land of the free.
But that's completely false, right? You do. You have the option to vote for the president.
No, you're missing my point. Presumably deliberately. I'm talking about Elon Musk. If you don't like what an unelected bureaucrat is doing, you can't do anything about it. Because
that's right. Until the next election.
Brilliant.
Right. And until the next election. You can't even do about
it the next way. You can get rid of Trump, but that doesn't have any bearing on Elon Musk.
Well, that's because the president appoints the secretaries of of all those cabinet posts. So that's what you do. You appoint, the executive branch manages those people.
Would Keir Starmer be wise to stand up, flex a bit of muscle? Does Donald Trump like, as we believe Putin likes, people that stand up for themselves, strong leaders, or is he better off being nice and doing tea and come and meet the king and all that kind of stuff?
I don't know. I think what he's doing so far is working. And I think that the president likes the United Kingdom. He actually likes Keir Starmer in spite of their political differences. They're getting along quite well. There's a team of people from the government in Washington working on a trade deal. So I hope that works out. And so, I think so far so good from Keir Starmer.
That view from Matt, there was something else in there as well, that we could be a potential conduit between the US and the EU.
Yeah.
Do you think, I found that quite an appealing idea. I don't know if it's remotely possible, but has it got legs?
I think it's a great idea. I've mentioned it a few times myself. And Matthew, you made a really good point. There is no meaningful trade surplus or deficit with the UK, which puts them in a great position because President Trump has to fix the trade deficit with the EU. It's 180 billion. That's funded by U.S. taxpayers, which was fine for generations when we were really rich and didn't have a debt problem. Now we have 11 trillion of new debt, 2.5 trillion a year under Biden. And that's just unsustainable, right? We're paying interest payments on 36 trillion in debt. That comes to $1 trillion a year. Like it,
Well, then
it
you
has
think
to be
about it.
fixed.
If you got the super rich, like, I don't know, Donald Trump and Elon Musk, to actually pay a bit more tax, the Treasury might look a little rosier. Greg, pleasure talking to you as always. Robust ideas. Listening to that, Professor Michael Jacobs, a Professor of Political Economy at the University of Sheffield, an advisor to Gordon Brown during his times as both Chancellor and Prime Minister to boot. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Matthew.
So, Greg there, of the opinion that perhaps playing softball, keeping our head down, mindful of the fact that we have a fairly balanced trade relationship with the US, that we could be okay.
Should we just correct first the completely inaccurate statement just made by your previous speaker about the trade relationship between the US and the EU? It's just completely wrong. There is a deficit in goods trade between the EU and the US, but they don't only trade goods. In modern economies, we also trade services. And if you include services, there is a very, very small trade deficit between the EU and the US. So this is simply wrong. And the idea that that deficit is paid for by American taxpayers is completely wrong. It's American consumers who are buying European goods and services, and they seem to like them, and that's why they buy them. It's nothing to do with the government, nothing to do with American debt paid by government or whatever. That's just completely wrong. And I'm afraid it's the kind of misleading information which is circulating in the US now because of the Trump administration about these trade relationships and so on. It really is wrong.
Has there ever been a trade war that resulted in a unanimous victory for one side or another?
Well, trade wars, I mean, as they're now known, reciprocal tariffs hurt everybody. So the American consumer is the person or the people who pay the tariffs. So Trump has tried to tell the American public that these are in some way taxes on the foreign countries that are exporting into the United States. It's not the case. A tariff is a tax at the border paid for by the consumer of the product. So American consumers are now paying more for all those goods that Trump has imposed tariffs on. Now, it's possible that over time this might persuade them to buy more American goods. So that's the kind of economic rationale. But they're paid for by American consumers. And of course, if we impose tariffs, those will be reciprocal tariffs, the so-called trade war. We would then be paying extra taxes on American goods. And again, we might then transfer some of our consumption to goods made in the UK or elsewhere. But essentially, this is a tax on domestic consumers in both directions, and that makes us all worse off. And the problem of all of this, and this is the problem that Keir Starmer is facing this morning, is if the UK imposes reciprocal tariffs, that makes the UK worse off than if we didn't have them. Now, we are going to be made worse off by the tariffs that America imposed, but imposing tariffs back on them makes us even worse off. On the other hand, it gives you a bargaining chip. And that's the problem that Keir Starmer is facing, which is clearly he doesn't want any of these tariffs. But is it better to at least threaten that you will put some on the Americans if they put them on you or not? And I think
go on. That's the question.
Most game theorists and economists and others would say you have at least to threaten them, because then you've got a bargaining chip, which is to say, if you don't do yours, we won't do ours.
May I ask where would be the best place for Keir Starmer to threaten a tariff or two? What areas?
Well, the interesting thing about this is that the kind of standard would be just to do the same tariffs as the other side have done. So basically on American cars and American steel and so on. The problem with that, obviously, is that those things may not be traded equally. Yeah. So what Mexico and Canada have done, and they've given us nice little models for how to do this, is to target American goods coming in, which are particularly sensitive in the US. So, for example, whiskey is one of the things that Canada has targeted. So it would be sensible to draw up a threatened package. Probably not to do it yet, but a threatened package which has a particular focus on sensitive American goods produced in Republican voting states. Basically, what you're trying to do is you're saying, if you're going to hurt us, we can hurt you back. therefore don't do it. And I'm sure that kind of package is being designed in Downing Street and in the business as it is in the EU.
Very briefly, if I may, just a very quick answer. Are Trump's tariffs, are they going to harm the US economy?
Well, your previous speaker was correct to say that because the US is a huge continental country, it doesn't import and export as much as smaller countries like the UK. So they do harm the economy, but not as much as tariffs would harm the UK. Simply because America does less and less of that as a proportion of its total economy. But it does raise inflation, as you pointed out. That keeps interest rates higher, and that does hurt the American economy, and of course it would hurt the British economy hugely, and that's the great risk that we're playing with here.
Gosh.
Professor, so this is going to be very difficult for everybody.
Professor Michael Jacobs, got to leave it there. Thank you for giving us your wise counsel this hour on a Sunday morning. Most appreciated, I have to say.